Welcome to Season 2 of Lead Speak, where we continue to empower the current and the next generation of SLP leaders in public education. Whether you're an aspiring leader, a seasoned pro, or somewhere in between, this season is packed with insight tailored just for you. I'm your co-host, Nathalie Lebrun.
And I'm Judy Rich. Welcome to Season 2 of Lead Speak, school-based SLP podcast. Happy New Year, everyone. We are delighted to be here today talking about the wrap-up of Season 2 in Lead Speak. We've had interesting guests, interesting conversations, and so we're going to filter all of our comments in the wrap-up of Season 2 through an interesting book and some interesting concepts that Nathalie came across. So first of all, Happy New Year, Nat. How are you?
I'm great. Happy New Year, Judy. A lot has happened, I feel, since we first recorded our episode 1 for Season 2, which was, I think, in October, right?
Lots has happened. Lots currently happening. Our hearts and prayers are going out to our colleagues and friends in California. Nathalie, what have you seen? I saw more fires this morning, so now they're up to 6 fires with lots and lots of people, homes, property affected. And the difference being that those gusty Santa Ana winds have pushed fires into populated areas. So wildfires that used to stay in the hills are now threatening lives. And it's just staggering in terms of impact. And so our thoughts go out to you all in California.
Yeah, we're recording this on January 9th, right? So the news is showing that, this is definitely out of control. We can't help but to think about our colleagues and our listeners out there. So hopefully things will get back to some form of normalcy as soon as possible. So for our wrap-up episode, Judy, I texted you one day and I'm like, I just found the greatest book ever. And I'm a huge business book person. I don't really care for fiction books. So for fun, I read a lot of business books, which is fun. I've always enjoyed doing that. But I came across this book called Unreasonable Hospitality, and it's written by Will Guidara. And I came across this book a couple different ways. For some reason, it started popping up on my Instagram algorithm as a new and upcoming book. I also had just finished watching the series of The Bear on Hulu, and it won so many awards. It's a great show about this restaurant business and the love and the culture around developing a fine dining restaurant in Chicago. It's definitely a series that is not for the faint of heart. The first 2 episodes, I felt like I was in the kitchen with the people sweating, cutting carrots, because it's a very intense show, but a great show. So I had watched The Bear. I've seen this book pop up on my Instagram algorithm. And then last but not least, this leadership individual called Simon Sinek started talking about this book on his various social media channels. And Simon Sinek has always been a guy that I resonate with his philosophy on leadership, the importance of building good culture and team. And so I was thinking to myself, like, if Simon likes this book, then I might like this book as well. And so I picked it up on my flight to ASHA in Seattle, and I started reading it, and I just couldn't put it down. And so that's when I sent you a text, Judy, and then I just started talking about this book with my Starbucks barista. I sent it to my brother in El Paso. I talked about it with my husband. In any way I can talk about this book, like if somebody says a word, I'm like, I can make a link to it. That's how much I love this book. So, Judy, you picked it up. What were your thoughts on it?
Well, I picked it up because you talked about it so much and loved it. Absolutely loved it. I consume books of all genre. And so I'm a little bit more eclectic because I love the mindless mystery novel fiction as well as business books, and have for years been reading about leadership and Who Moved My Cheese and all of those kinds of leadership books that we experienced in years past. And but opening this book, I usually go to the acknowledgments at the back of the book before I start reading a book. And one of the acknowledgments was to Simon Sinek, uh, who, whose books I also consume and look forward to reading. And so in those acknowledgments, I thought, all right, good, good. And then I read that Will Guidara is a co-producer of The Bear. And so I thought, he's branched out from the restaurant business. This might be a good read. So I started in reading it, and sure enough, it was a can't put this down book. My other marker of a really good book is when I go, oh, I'm going to have to keep thinking about that. Oh, I'm going to have to keep thinking about that. And certainly in each chapter, if not every few pages, there's my note to self to keep thinking about that. So there's a lot of great think abouts, lots to talk about. And we made immediate connections to our very engaging guests in season 2 who have a heart for leadership in the space of speech language pathology, working with clients, working with in leadership positions with other professionals. And so that's why we just wanted to say out loud some of the links that we've been thinking about between Unreasonable Hospitality and our guests in season 2. So why don't you get us started, and we'll just ramble through some of those connections that we made.
I love it. So our very first guest this season was the speech dude himself, Chris Wegner. And in full disclosure, I was trying not to fangirl too much about the fact that the speech dude was spending time with us, because I've always been a big fan of his. And in his episode, we covered a lot of ground. But what kept on coming up for me is this need to always be learning and to always be considering the client's perspective or your student's perspective and their own needs above perhaps what you have been doing in the past, and always kind of staying humble to the idea that our learning journey as speech language pathologists and leaders in special education is never done. And if you think it is, you might be getting yourself into trouble pretty soon, right? So in the book with Will, on page 110, he writes, often the perfect moment is to give someone more responsibility than when they're ready. And I just thought that was super insightful, because I think about what Chris was talking about with his students and the way that he has really adopted a neuroaffirming practice with his students, whereby he is allowing them to really kind of set the tone and set the pace as to what they are interested in learning more about and to explore. And he's not waiting for them to have mastered all the steps leading up to a big skill, right? What Chris is doing with his practice is that he's really dialing into the students' aspirations, their goals, their interests, and then starting to work on the things that kind of are needed in order to make some gains there. So I just thought Will's idea of looking at whoever you're serving, whether it's students in front of you in your therapy space, or if you're leading a team, looking at the people that work alongside you, and not waiting until they have shown complete mastery or complete competence towards that skill, but actually helping them rise by saying, let's go, let's try this right now. How about you, Judy? What do you think? Where's your connection with this one?
My connection is just several places that resonated deeply. To continue your thoughts on neuroaffirming care, page 66 of the book, there's a quote that I love that said, "A leader's responsibility is to identify the strengths of the people on their team, no matter how buried those strengths might be." So, in talking about neuroaffirming care and putting the young people first in terms of skill development, self advocacy, self determination, becoming strong, Chris provides leadership to the individuals on his caseload to develop their skills and using a strengths-based approach, finding the students' interests, like you mentioned, their natural inclinations. And so he's developed a framework that drives his approach that really gets him in tune with the strengths of the individual that he's working with, and then matches what he does to build communication skills so that they can express their strengths, they can be their best selves in terms of communication across environments. So just working on that autonomy and finding strengths in people is something that really, really resonated with me. Another thing, kind of different strand, is that when Chris was talking to us about his journey to becoming a speech language pathologist, he talked a lot about his mom and dad. And he talked about his dad, who was a PE teacher, coach, and pulled Chris along in his youth to be like an assistant coach and to work closely with people on teams, students on teams, or team members who had specific challenges. And his dad's advice to him, to Chris, was to learn to serve others in order to create a win in life for yourself. And that resonated because of the strong parallel to what Will did in his book about always coming back to going to his dad for advice when he was facing a difficult decision, when he was at an intersection and had to make a choice, when he was struggling, when he was burnt out, when he was challenged. I just love that he went to his dad for his advice, and his dad is a very, very wise human and gave him incredible things to think about. Never really directed him with specific action steps, but gave him things to think about in order to make his own decisions. So Will's dad was the master at encouraging self-determination and autonomy and decision-making. And I just love that because I had a dad who was the same way. And I went to my dad for advice about leadership, about solving people problems, about those kinds of things. And he always came through for me. So those are two things that really resonated in terms of what I read in Unreasonable Hospitality and what I heard from the speech dude. So thank you to both gentlemen.
I think this also points to like our need as aspiring leaders or people who are serving in leadership roles to find that voice, right? And finding people who may not be in our space, in our industry, to kind of give you guidance and see how it applies to where you're serving right now. So the importance of mentorship as current leaders or aspiring leaders, but also being open for yourselves to maybe be a mentor to somebody else as well, because you never know what your own lived experiences may do for somebody who's trying to work through difficult times, consider challenging new things. And I think Chris and Will, and just now you, Judy, bring beautiful evidence to the power of mentorship and guidance. I love it. Speaking of mentor, our next episode was with Fong Lien Palafox, and she, I think, came across very loud, very clear about the importance of leading with heart. And whenever I see Fong's name attached to any kind of professional development, whether it's with a big audience, with a smaller audience, I know I'm going to walk away from her message feeling like I just got a big hug just got a big hug, and it's going to be a beautiful message that's not only super aspirational, but it's also going to be very driven by data and with some really actionable steps. Right, Judy?
Right. And, with Fong, she doesn't back off from the hard stuff in terms of leading with heart. So I think you picked up on a time in Unreasonable Hospitality when Will and his dad had an experience that should have been the worst time of their life, but they had an incredible experience. Talk about that a little bit now.
Yeah, for sure. So this is early on in the book. I think it really sets forward Will's why, as to why is it that he was so relentless in his desire to achieve such greatness in the restaurant business, in the hospitality business. So it's on page 19 for those of you who have the book. But he talks about how this individual named Daniel, who becomes his mentor, offered him and his dad some beautiful light and some hope through a beautiful meal at his restaurant, and how much that helped him and his dad work through a really difficult period in their life. And Will calls it a life-changing moment when he received that level of hospitality and care through a form of a meal. And immediately when I read that, I thought about Fong and how she kept on coming back to this idea of really acknowledging and really savoring the role that we get to do as speech language pathologists. And I know each of us have a slightly different kind of why statement for ourselves. But for me, as a speech language pathologist, I get to help people be more independent than they were yesterday through whatever form of communication they're currently accessing. That's my why. And when I read this book and learning about Will's why, he kept on going through really hard times, opening a restaurant and rising in the ranks, the world ratings of restaurants. He kept on pushing through because of that life-changing experience he received in a form of meal. And I think that is so critical as a leader, whether you're in that role right now or you're not, is kind of identifying those moments in your life that you're like, oh, I need to do this because of XYZ, right? This experience has led me to understand the importance, and it validates all the hard work that I'm putting into this career, into this profession, into caring for others. So I loved it. I loved it. How about you, Judy? What was your connection here?
Kind of the same connection. There's so many connections between this book and Fong's Unreasonable Hospitality, as she mentors us all in terms of heart leadership. On page 98, there was a quote that said, "No matter what you do, it's hard to excel if you don't love it." Well, that phrase has Fong Palafox written all over it. The moment, continuing the quote, "The moment you start to pursue service through the lens of hospitality, you understand there's nobility in it, a reason for pride. When you're really nice to people, they'll be really nice to others, who will in turn pay it forward." And if you'll remember, if you listen to Fong's episode, neither Nathalie nor I could do the closure moment because we were stuck on Fong's leadership word, which was truth. Your own personal truth is her leadership word. And truth may be manifested differently for different people. Well, that blew our minds. And so we were trying to process that and couldn't come up with words to say goodbye or close off the episode. So Fong said, "Oh, well, that's okay. I'll do it." And she, if you listen to nothing else, listen to the closure of Fong's episode in season 2, where she talks about this noble, sacred work that we do in helping others communicate well and connect with other people. So I got that. I also continued on with the connection theme Page 80, the goal is to connect with people and to create a genuine relationship and do what you need to in order to connect with the people you're serving. So if you're serving your team members, your SLP team members, if you're serving the clients on your caseload, if you're serving families, no matter who you're serving, you need to connect in order to create or to attain that unreasonable hospitality. Last thing, can I have one more thing about
Go for
connecting with
it,
Fong?
Judy.
Okay. Page 99, Will says, you must be able to name for yourself why your work matters. So and Fong talks about that a lot, of putting words to your why, so that when you're having a downhill moment, you can express in words why your work matters, because it does matter.
I love it. I'm here for it every day, all day. There was one more thing. Since you are an avid reader of Simon Sinek, on page 100 in Will's book, he talks about Simon's book, The Infinite Game, and Simon's recommendation of us finding a worthy rival. Which on the surface level, you're like, wait. Like, I thought we were all in this together, helping us out. And I completely agree with this idea that you need to be able to find people either within your close proximity community or outside that are doing things in a way that you can aspire to and learn from, and you can pursue bigger ideas, different ideas, so that you can help to push the profession forward. And I think with Fong, if you listen to her episode, she definitely talks about the importance of community and being able to be there for one another, and to have these conversations in an open way, and to not just like keep your challenges and your insecurities to yourself, right? Like speaking out and advocating. And I just think the idea of us as leaders being inspired by other people doing things better than what we're currently doing is incredibly motivating. And like what Will was saying, that's the only way that we are going to push our profession forward, is by being inspired by what others are doing really, really well.
Right. And I would add to that another nugget from Simon Sinek in his book, Leaders Eat Last, which I also just finished right before Unreasonable Hospitality. So I had the theme, the food theme going during the holidays, which is really, I did a lot of excellent food during the holidays. But Sinek talks about a lot of the same ideas that Will Guidara talked about in Unreasonable Hospitality. But in Leaders Eat Last, there's a lot there in terms of leadership. But he was talking at one point about, he was having a conversation with someone, and she was worried about losing her job. And she made a comment about the company has no heart. Is on page 164. The company has no heart. And Sinek's processing of that is that she would say the company has no heart is a recognition of the lack of empathy in the culture. And when empathy is lacking, aggression, fear, and other destructive feelings and actions dominate. So instead of this heart leadership, you can quickly disintegrate into these feelings of these more destructive feelings. And so as leaders, we really need to understand and articulate our why, and we need to internalize this nobility and sacredness of our profession in terms of supporting communication for fragile individuals. And I just love that we have the strength to overcome any of that destructiveness in terms of culture. So that got us thinking more about the concept of creating culture, which Nathalie will talk about at the end of this.
Sneak peek. What I also really liked about Will's book throughout, and this is something that when I felt brave enough, I said out loud, but there were many times I didn't feel brave enough, was this idea of taking care of your team first. If you take care of your team will take care of your restaurant guests. Your team will take care of your students. Your team will take care of your clients. Whatever industry you're in, if your team is well taken care of, we have empathy towards, we foster their growth, we champion their expansion to different knowledge areas and opportunities, then they themselves will be able to do what they need to do in order for your restaurant to go number one worldwide, for your team to be a team that other districts look to and be like, this is the team that we want to be in 10 years from now, right? And I just love the fact that he did not shy away from saying that out loud. I'm just really happy that he did, because I felt very validated whenever he talked about the importance of taking care of your people first. I just love that. Speaking of taking care of your people, one episode that I was really particularly excited about this season, and I'm so glad that I got to meet him, was your dear friend, Perry Flynn, right? And Perry, initially when we were planning Perry's episode, we definitely want to talk to him about like his role as far as like being the liaison between like school districts and the state. Like that's really important. We also want to talk to him about AI, but I feel like our conversation kind of like took this really kind of unexpected but very neat turn, where we had this very kind of open conversation about like, what is it that school districts need to know and need to hear in order to make their places of work really interesting to keep and to attract speech language pathologists, right? And I just thought that was like a really great gift that we weren't expecting from this episode.
Yeah, I really enjoyed our conversation with Perry, and just always learn so much when I lean into listening to Perry Flynn.
So there's a couple different things that stood out for me as far as like making links between Perry's episode and Unreasonable Hospitality. On page 104 of the book, Will talks about developing an ownership program in his restaurant, where basically he, for lack of better words, he was able to develop these subspecialties in his restaurant in order to become excellent within that specialty, right? So a lot of restaurants, lots of fine dining restaurants, may have a person who is an expert in wine, might be a sommelier, right? You might have somebody in a restaurant who is an expert in bakery and desserts. But he took it one step further in this book, and he wanted to develop a coffee program, a really phenomenal coffee program at his restaurant, because he really wanted to uplift their core value of passion, of developing passion in their staff in order for their customers to really appreciate what hospitality they had to offer. And in Perry's episode, we discuss the benefits of speech language pathologists becoming the go-to person on different topics, whether you become the go-to person on artificial intelligence, whether you become the go-to person on coding Excel spreadsheets with formulas, right? Having people on your team that you can go to and be like, my vision is this. I know you are passionate about that. Now take this and go make it awesome. And that's like a direct quote from Will's book, where he says, it's yours now, go make it awesome. And I wish that phrase had come my way about 6 years ago, because I think that's a really great way to be able to, as a leader, to be able to grow future leaders. But for myself, it's a really great way to delegate things and to trust your people, to grow knowledge areas and to make your vision come to reality. Maybe a lot faster that you can as a leader, because you're overseeing so many different aspects of the department. But maybe they will do a better job than you can because they have developed that expertise and that passion in that realm of things. So that's how I connected this idea of developing like an ownership program within the scope of speech pathology and maybe even like education as a whole. How about you, Judy? What did you think?
What really grabbed me and linked between Unreasonable Hospitality and Perry Flynn's dialogue is pretty early in the book when Will was making a personal move from a small restaurant into a big corporate entity. First of all, he didn't know if he wanted to do that because he'd always hated big business, where things are too formulaic, things have to adhere to the company standard. Um, but he went ahead and made the move and stayed there for a while and learned a whole bunch about the business model, about purchasing, about finance, about waste, about efficiency, about who can move what flowers where, those kinds of things. So what I got, where my mind went was this. We've been talking a lot about heart leadership and connections with people and those things that are a little bit easier in a small organization compared to a larger organization with a lot of layers. But the contrast I made was SLP leaders in schools always have to walk the tightrope of being in compliance, adhering to doing things the right way within timelines. Everybody do it the same way, meet your timelines. And the small restaurant, the restaurant mentality of connections, serving the clients, thinking of new and fun ways to improve the menu, everybody collaborating, everybody being able to see everybody else and get into a rhythm. So the heart leadership versus the compliance leadership is a connection I made. And we talked a lot about that in Perry's episode. So if you're interested in that, he had a lot of very practical suggestions and also has a website, perryflynn.com, to go to get a lot of tools to meet the compliance piece. And then he had some practical suggestions that lead more over to making connections and the heart leadership. And I think you found you got into it with Perry about retention and hiring and those kinds of things. So talk to us about that, Nathalie.
There was a segment in Will's book that really made me kind of stop because I had never really thought about hiring in this perspective before, where Will describes hiring as a sobering process. It's a sobering responsibility. And I'm like, okay, what does that mean? Right? Because as a leader, oftentimes in a school district, that a lot of the hiring comes your way, whether you are hiring and then placing people on teams or you're making hiring recommendations, right? That's a big part of our gig in public schools and in leadership. And what Will talks about is it's a sobering responsibility because you can essentially make or break your team, right? It can dampen not only your team's experience if you hire somebody that doesn't fit and isn't worthy of being on your team, but it can also dampen your customer's experience. So in his case, it would be his restaurant goers, right? But for us in schools, it's dampening the experience of the student, of the families, of your educational teams on your campuses, right? And so what his recommendation was is to hire slow. And I'm like, oh man, that's tricky, right? When so many school districts right now are trying to fill in the hiring gaps, right? And they're, trying to weigh the pros and cons of direct hire versus contracted versus in-person versus telepractice, right? But his thing is hire slow to make sure that every single hire decision that you make is going to be a positive one and is going to affect positive change, not only for your team, but also for your customer, for your student, for the school district. And one question that he suggests that we consider whenever we are interviewing somebody is, could this person become a leader on my team? So when you're sitting down across from somebody, you're going through the process of the interview questions and whatever, beyond them having a valid license, beyond them having the right educational credential, could we ask the question internally, can this person be our next leader in this team? And how that might change the way that you're making those hiring decisions, and what positive outcomes that can come from hiring people where you're like, this person is worth investing into. This person I can trust to lead a meeting. This person could develop an expertise in XYZ and be my go-to on this. So I just really appreciated Will's semantic use of sobering here, because it's true. I can 100% seeing that being a hiring manager or being part of the hiring process is a really, I mean, it's really foundational to everything that you're trying to achieve as a leader.
Harry also talked about doing both financial, meaning compensation efforts, and non-financial, no-cost efforts to attract and retain SLPs in schools, public school districts in North Carolina. And he's done some an interesting look through the years, and kind of a modification of Ash's work on using a workload approach for caseload management. And in fact, he had a presentation at the recent ASHA convention about some of the data that they figured out. But what they've done is, in providing a framework in North Carolina for school districts to use a workload approach for balancing the work of speech language pathologists in schools, he has also tracked the effectiveness of use of that framework for attracting and retaining staff, and has looked at which districts use that approach and how many vacancies do they have. Oh, they don't have any vacancies. Or, oh, they're able to maintain caseloads of around 50 instead of upwards of 70, 75, 100 in other districts that don't use the approach. And that all goes to how many positions are approved by the school board in the budget. So there's all of this swirl around in terms of data, making connections, taking care of your team. But he gave really practical suggestions for how to attract staff and retain staff. And I really, really appreciated that. And it's because of his use of data and his willingness to evaluate and have important conversations with the leadership in the school districts in North Carolina or the legislature about speech language pathology services in schools and the importance, noble, sacred profession that it is. So I really like that. The other fun thing that came up in Unreasonable Hospitality is an expectation accompanied with the absence of a solution. So when Will Guidara was talking about wanting to make things, at least do one thing to make the reservationist office better, more responsive, more hospitable, it became an expectation, a mandate. But then what he told the staff in the reservationist office is, we know you have something to contribute, and we can't wait to see what it is that you develop in order to improve your shop, your part of this organization, this operation. So it was an expectation and setting the bar really high without any solution. And that allowed and led to pretty incredible innovation on the part of the reservationist office.
Can you imagine hearing that, like, as a new employee on any team in any industry, right? Where your manager, your boss comes to you and say, we hired you for a reason. We know you can do this. We can't wait to see how much of an impact you're going to have here. Go. Right? Wow. I mean, that's intimidating. Absolutely. But it's also, I would think, incredibly maybe freeing, because you're basically saying, like, we need you here. We need your brain here. So that could definitely help with the retention of staff. That could help with the innovative work that we must do in order to serve our clients and our students better. I really, really like that part in Will's book. I think that's a beautiful way. And it's also acknowledging that you as a leader don't know everything. Right? I think there's a quote somewhere in his book, and I didn't write down the page number, but he talks about, like, the goal in leadership is not to have a ring full of keys. The goal of leadership is for you to have the key to the front door. And so in order for you to do that, you have to be able to give the keys to different people on your team for them to unlock that door. But you as a leader can open that front door for everybody. And I just thought, what a great visual. That's so nifty. So the next person that we talked to was Stephanie Michelle Sigwart. And I had seen her on the socials. I had seen her give presentations before on nonviolent communication. And I'm just like, oh, we need to have Steffi on this podcast, because what jarring term that is, that's so cool. And also, like, that's such an important skill. That communication piece is everything. It can make and break everything that you do and don't do as a leader. So what came up for you, Judy, on this one when you were reading Will's book and thinking about our conversation with Stephanie?
Page 140, Will talks about how you use your words, which is all about what Stephanie was talking to us about, and the power of reframing and using words differently. He said that sarcasm is always, 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 always the wrong medium for a conversation. Praise is affirmation. Criticism is investment. Now, a lot of us think criticism is a negative because we tend towards perfectionism, and we say we want continuous improvement, but we want that in the organization, not necessarily in ourselves. So the criticism is investment. I think I made links to what Michelle talked about because it is really worth the leader's time in order to make that investment work, to use the right words in criticism. So sarcasm is a tearing away, a tearing down. And we all have people in our lives who use sarcasm as their channel to humor. And it works most times if you know the person, except when you're tired and vulnerable and feeling less than. Sarcasm is always hurtful, even if it's not about you. So my 2025 goal is to really stay away from sarcasm in terms of the words or the intonation or the eye rolls that I use. Praise is affirmation. We all need it. We all need more of it. Some of us need affirmation more than others because that's our love language. But that criticism as an investment really had me thinking about the words that we use and what Michelle talked about.
Yeah, I think that's another, like, power sentence that he had in his book. Criticism is an investment, because I definitely have never framed that way. It also made me think about, like, you investing in your people, or you investing in your colleagues by giving that criticism back, and what a gift that can be for them. Stephanie definitely gave us some really practical steps on how to go about giving criticism and having those conversations where you're observing a behavior, you're describing the behavior, you're talking about the expectation and how to move forward. So she gave us a really good framework to work through those difficult conversations. But yeah, I thought that was like a really powerful portion of the book. And also, there's something to be said that sarcasm is so culturally bound, right? If we as leaders are using sarcasm, we might be, somebody might be hearing our sarcasm and have a very different cultural filter of it. Uh, they were also talking with a variety of people with different, uh, neurobiologies. And so thinking about neuroaffirming practice, we may not be supporting those who are neurodivergent on our teams with people that we work alongside to. In Will's book, he talks also about how informality is earned, right? And to me, when I think about sarcasm, I think about that as an informal way of communication. And if I think about it through Will's perspective, I would need to earn the right to use that communication modality over time, not establishing a new relationship through informal communication. As a person who tends to be more informal in the way that she speaks, it really made me kind of take a pause there, be like, okay, I could probably tighten up on that skill set for sure. When I was thinking about Stephanie's episode, and the intersection with Will's book, on page 185, he says, if you don't have the courage to state a goal out loud, you'll never achieve it. And I'm like, yep, that's very, very true. And I think Stephanie talked to that, being able to say what it is that you need. Don't assume that other people will kind of fill in the blanks for you. Just say what you need. But first, also identify what it is that you need, right? So maybe not coming up with the solution to the problem, but backtracking a little bit first and figuring out, like, what is it that you need? Is it a sense of security? Is it a sense of hope? Is it more control? Is it more predictability? Like, what is it that you need in order to address the issue in front of you? There was a story in Will's book. I think it was the same section, Judy, as what we were just talking about in regards to giving people permission of creating something great, where he talks about the challenge that he gave his team members to creating a ticketless coat check system, because he had identified this coat checking system as a barrier to, like, the level of hospitality that he wanted to facilitate at his restaurant. And so he went to his team and he was saying, I want you to create a coat check system where there isn't a ticket exchanged. And he said, and they're like, well, how do we do that? And he replied back and he said, no idea, but you'll come up with something brilliant. Right. And so I think it points back to what Stephanie was saying, that you need to identify your goal. You need to be able to say that out loud. So in this case, his goal was to veer more towards his goal of this extreme level of hospitality by taking away the ticket system for coat checks. And he's like, I need your help in doing that. And then he gave over the reins to the people that had time and expertise and passion towards that. And then he was able to figure that out. So I was a fan of that portion. So our last conversation, Judy, was with Becca Bishop and Melissa Rajaram. And the response that we've been getting online from this episode has been phenomenal. People are really resonating with this topic of artificial intelligence, right? Whether it's for them, their personal use at home and with their family and friends, but also, like, where does this fit when we think about our practice, and how do we integrate it to make sure that we are really serving our students and our communities to the highest level possible as licensed professionals and speech, language, and communication experts, right? I have to say, though, I need to speak to a mistake I made in this episode, where I misspoke at the very beginning, and I wanted to correct myself, and I wanted to thank Becca and Melissa for being so generous with my ability to apologize to them. So for Melissa, her actual current title is Director of Product at Amplio. And Becca Bishop, her current title at Amplio is Vice President of District Relations. So that was my bad. I apologize. You can see their amazing work if you check out their LinkedIn profiles. Their work history is all in there. So thinking about AI, thinking about practicing on top of our license, what came up for you, Judy, as far as the link between Will's book and our conversation with Becca and Melissa?
I've been watching Amplio Learning Technologies almost since they were formed as a startup technology company. And one of the links I immediately made was first of all to Chris, the speech dude, when we titled his episode Unlearn and Rethink, because that's everything that Becca and Melissa are involved with. So we started with Chris talking about change your mindset about neuroaffirming care, and we ended with Becca and Melissa talking about change your mindset about the way you approach your work. And so that unlearn and rethink is totally applicable to what's going on for Becca and Melissa on a daily basis. The other thing that I've observed is that with a technology startup, you have to have a clear purpose. And then you have to stay true to your purpose. So you really do need to do less and do it well. So I wish them well in their pursuit of leadership in this very competitive space, because what they're trying to do is create, using generative AI and other traditional AI tools, as well as a lot of knowledge and research base in speech language pathology. They're trying to create a system specific to working with children with communication disorders and dyslexia, stretched out to dyslexia. So they're very focused in this ed tech world on speech language pathology services. So that was very cool. And they've also had to learn the thing about slow down to speed up. Everything in technology, especially AI, is going at warp speed. But if you listen carefully to Melissa and Becca, they get it. They understand how to apply generative AI and tools in traditional AI to what they're doing and to what their purpose is. So they're also committed to their customers and to the heartfelt leadership that we've been talking about. So they're not just super smart, not only super smart technology people, but they're also working with team members. They're also working on behalf of the clients who will eventually be served with their products. So there was a lot of that edgy, unreasonable hospitality. We remember why we're doing this, and we can state our purpose out loud and put it into words. So really nice connections there.
For me, when I was thinking about Becca and Melissa's conversation, I kept on coming back to a topic that we've already covered, which is restaurant smart versus corporate smart. Right. So for both of these speech language pathologists, they started off, they went to graduate school, they did the clinical fellowship, right? They all started off like serving our students, our clients in a pretty kind of like, I want to say like traditional route, quote unquote, right? And now their career has taken them into this tech space where they might be the only person in speech language pathology with that kind of background, right? And so they, and that didn't happen overnight. That's a long progressive career to where they are today. And then who knows where they're going to go in the next couple of years. In Will's book on page 37, he said, "Waiting didn't dim my ambition or hamper my progress. It taught me to trust the process." which, as a person who is not a super patient person, that's a lesson that I have to kind of keep on coming back to and kind of like reorientate myself towards, is this idea that nothing is going to flip with a switch. I think we've talked about this in season 1 and in season 2, Judy, where especially in public education, things take semesters and years in order to make progress towards bettering how we're serving our students. And sometimes, as the leader, you must gather insight and training and knowledge beyond our little bubble of speech, right? I think it was with Cherry Wright, how she became this super knowledgeable person in finance, right, and bookkeeping in order for her to better serve the speech language pathologists and the other members of her district, right? So she got these different life experience, these professional experience, in order for her to become an even better version of a speech language pathologist and serve her community in that way. And I just couldn't help but to think the importance of us as leaders making space for opportunities that might be a little bit left of center or right of center, to gain this knowledge and to receive that as just part of that process, that learning process for you to reach your ultimate goal. So I just, really enjoyed how Will was able to point to his initial experience working in restaurants, bussing tables, waiting tables, and managing a restaurant, and then leading a restaurant, to then taking kind of a detour into the corporate aspect of things, like you were talking about, right? Shipping, the books, receiving food, that kind of thing. And then he was able to melt that experience with his restaurant smarts, and then become an even better leader and be able to achieve his ultimate goal for his work. So so good. So that was our last conversation of the season. So I feel like we finished with a bang, right? And so then, Judy, we have been kind of envisioning what season 3 looks like, right? And I want to tell a quick story about something on my desk. So on my desk at home, I have this daily flip calendar, right? So every day, there's your month, there's your day, and there's a quote associated with it. And this thing has been correct in kind of setting the tone for the day. It just so happened that a lot of things that happened in each of those days kind of relate back to the quote at hand. So a couple of days ago, Judy, when you and I were talking about season 3, a quote came across my calendar. And I sent it to you because I was just like, okay, here we go. So the quote was, create what you wish existed. And I was like, okay. And then when I was thinking about Will's book, in Will's book, I think one word to describe that book is culture. How throughout everything that he does in that book for his restaurants, for his team, is all about building the culture he was trying to achieve in the restaurant space. And so when I'm thinking about season 3, I'm thinking, how do leaders create a culture whereby they are creating what they wish existed? And I think we already have a number of people that want to come and talk with us on this podcast that are doing just that in big and in more quiet ways.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it, and framing our conversations with our guests around this culture idea is super powerful for me, because it pulls everything from season 1 and everything from season 2 forward into more informed, deeper dialogue about SLP leadership in schools. So yay. I'm just really, really looking forward to it.
So be sure to subscribe, like, follow, this podcast, wherever it is that you get your podcast from. And if for some reason you can't find us on your favorite podcast streaming service, send us a message. Let us know. Because right now you can listen in on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, YouTube, and Podcastle. But if there's another way that you'd like to hear from us, please let us know. But when you follow us, you'll be able to stay in the loop as far as season 3 is concerned. And you'll get some insights on who we're bringing in to speak and kind of the timing of season 3. So we're super, we're super grateful that you are spending part of your week with us. And we just love hearing all great messages of how you are finding some wisdom and some inspiration to affect positive change wherever you are. So we are appreciative. So until next time, take care.